Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that approaches leadership seriously. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the leader of the House of Commons, although I should warn Mr. Rees-Mogg, our chairs do not recline. More's the pity. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from how the government exactly plans to take back control to the latest public opinion poll, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett, former Home Secretary, former Education Secretary, and of course the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Khurram Asif, the CEO of TechSimulator. In 2011, then 11-year-old Khurram started a YouTube channel which compared and examined various pieces of consumer technology. He then turned his eye to the manufacture, assembly, and shipping of custom-built computers. In his first year, he shipped 37,000 units and generated enough income to once more change the immediate focus of the company to software. I look forward to finding out more. Khurram, welcome.
Welcome, Jonathan. Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, I know it's been quite a few months since TechSimulator has been in the review. I think perhaps a perfect place to start would be perhaps if you could tell the listeners what you, the firm, have been up to since.
So TechSimulator has joined a lot more projects currently. My main two focuses are paper it right now. Considering all the issues that we've had with deforestation around the world, we've considered it quite deeply in terms of environmental issues that we're seeing, health issues, economic issues. So paper it's like a platform pretty much for tablets, iPads, those type of electronic devices, so that it would provide a much more paper-like feel. We have like loads of note-taking platforms around the world, but
yes.
With paper it's more, it uses like Grammarly APIs, and we could use that to allow people that even are dyslexic or unable to write or read, be able to use Siri and other notification and AI systems to be able to read and write through the program as well, and that way we can create like a paper-like feel. Most of our features are around for example, if I wrote a dissertation in university, I would say, hey Siri, I'm looking for a dissertation on global warming in 2017. It would find me that dissertation because it creates a summary of itself.
That must be a tremendous. And has this been finished, developed, or is this work in progress still, Khurram?
So we recently announced that we've just claimed venture capital over it. Cresmount Capital decided to invest in our project. Thank you. So we're starting like the major development side of it, working with Grammarly to put this out.
Very exciting, really. And I know, obviously, the firm was founded now in almost 10 years ago, 2011, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying, when you were just 11 years old. I imagine you've had to learn some pretty fast lessons in that time. What can you point to, I think, in the last 8 years or so that has really shown you how business and indeed the sector works?
So yeah, I've made many mistakes before I've got here.
No great person hasn't, I don't think.
I guess so. Yeah, I've come to realize that I've had loads of turn downs before I've got the yeses that I wanted, which is pretty much common anywhere. But Yes, I started off on YouTube. After that, I changed like the face of the company to making custom computers. After contract with Costco, we sold about 34,000 computers, which is, I think, still my biggest achievement.
You must be very proud of that still.
Thank you. Yeah, because Costco normally takes like from their chosen manufacturer, so it was the biggest thing to sell to them. And after that, it was I managed to get contracts at Rovio and Qatar Airways. That's what led us to the company today.
And where did you, it takes certainly an amount of bravery to go on the path like this. Where did you find your inspiration, do you think, originally for it, Khurram?
I've had a few like people that I look up to. My inspiration's probably my father from what, because he had a very big like entrepreneur mindset, and unfortunately he wasn't able to do what I wanted to do because of how like his own circumstances. So I managed to have like those entrepreneur mindset lessons from him, and that's where I moved on. But my idols, I would say, are like Sir Richard Branson or Bill Gates.
Some well-known entrepreneurs there, I think. Which is extraordinary, of course, and looking perhaps, without giving perhaps too many secrets away, looking forward over the next couple of years, what is it you have in mind for the company?
So right now the industry is moving a lot towards data. Data is like the biggest thing. So we want to make sure we have we're focused around how data is evolving, artificial intelligence, robotics. Those are things that I really want to focus in. But along with that, we've recently come up with an idea to open a bank similar to the lines of like Monzo or TransferWise. So we've registered Gelt. Gelt is it's a word for money in Hebrew. So we're looking to open this bank essentially after issues that we had faced with Barclays previously. So we saw that there's a gap in the market for the new modern banks to start with internet banking and business banking.
Very exciting, and I think what you say perhaps about data, I know it's perhaps one of the more, well, how do we put it politely, one of the more drier topics when we talk about the sector, but I think for a lot of people, they perhaps do underestimate the importance of it and the ability these days more than ever, or the ability to try and comprehend what can be thousands of pieces of information over a very short amount of time. And that will matter for so many different sectors, and if you crack that, you cracked a lot, I think it's probably fair to say.
Pretty much, yeah.
And on that, actually, looking at the sector more broadly, okay, what would you say, in your opinion, are the challenges facing it at the moment?
I think the biggest one that I've mentioned before, Brexit, is right now, especially because of how it influences the pound. That's true, yeah. Brexit, especially because of the pound, it really hurts the industry. We have a high saturation of European workers in London in the tech industry. So with that, and then obviously the trade that tech companies have with the US, Canada, and Europe, it looks like it's becoming tougher and will become tougher to deal with once Brexit has happened, especially if there's a no deal.
Actually, I think inevitably, I mean, we were probably going to talk about it later, weren't we? But I suppose since it's been brought up, we should mention it. In terms of Brexit, at this point, given that, the referendum was over 3 years ago now, is there, I sometimes get there's a feeling out there, a growing feeling, especially in the business world, from all sorts of sectors, that at this point, remain or leave, all we need is a decision. And we need to know how to react to it, because you have spent the last 3 years in limbo.
Yeah.
And it's unpredictable. What would you hope for, Khurram?
Well, you've said it perfectly. I think the whole country needs some sort of decision that we're going to move like a straight track to go for. Recently, I think when no deal was announced and Chancellor Sajid Javid decided to move forward with expenditure, the pound went up, which I saw was really weird. It was like the pound went up when we found out it was more because of the confidence that we know what we're doing.
Absolutely.
previously I've heard that Mark Carney, Governor of Bank of England, decided to say that it wouldn't have been the worst idea after seeing how our government performed with providing the right steps to set up a business or for the general public to know how a no-deal Brexit would turn out. So, yeah, pretty much it's all about we need a decision, a line to actually move forward in.
And I think, I think we'd both be fools if either of us sat here and said with any degree of confidence we could predict what was going to happen, because, we speak at a time, we called this last night, the government lost the motion for an early election. I think the first time in history the opposition have voted against having an election. We had a Prime Minister that says he doesn't want one and advocates for one, and we have a leader of the opposition who says he wants one but votes against it, or at least abstains. It's an extraordinary time. So perhaps when we speak again, we'll have a bit more clarification.
I hope so. Yeah, it's been tough to know that it's like you can predict one thing today, tomorrow, the day after, it's a completely different situation. 2 weeks ago, I was thinking no deal was inevitable, and now it's pretty much off the table. We can actually might have a general election.
Quite. By the time next week turns around, goodness knows what's happened. I think as things stand, of course, we mentioned already, the government's putting forward an early election motion again on Monday. By that point, the Ben bill would have had royal assent. Their hope is, and I assume Labour would probably vote with the government, but who knows? But we shouldn't get bogged down completely in politics. I do want to, before we do, I do want to talk about the sector a little more, especially from your point of view, the technological changes, and I know, of course, you're very focused on software, has changed so much in the last 10 years. And speaking again of unpredictability, those that can predict this will be very successful. How do you see it changing over the next few years, and the effects that's going to have not just on yourself but indeed clients and the like?
So, I always advise whoever's looking into making an app or a software are very expensive decisions to make. A successful app can be made ballpark 6 figures. So when you're spending that kind of money on something, you want it to work. You want to make sure your dream is fulfilled. So mostly, even today in the last couple of years, brands such as Uber, Amazon, Airbnb have really become successful. They've turned the industry around, and that's simply because none of them own assets. That's the common thing. It's becoming, like I said previously, the technological industry right now is very data averse. We make sure that whatever we can do is to grab data. And that's pretty much the model for even WhatsApp, which is the largest app in the world currently. So data, and then it's pretty much not owning assets. I think that's the way to go.
A fascinating period, I think, and with things developing so quickly. And maybe if I could tie perhaps the last 2 questions in, I suppose. But I forbid you from mentioning anything to do with Brexit as a condition of the answer. If you were Secretary of State for the day, I do ask everyone this, if you were Secretary of State for the day and you had a magic wand, what is it you would change in this country law-wise that would benefit the sector or benefit businesses like yours?
I would. That's actually a tough question.
I know it's putting you on the spot because there's probably 1,001 things you could do, but if there's one thing you might. We've to be fair, Graham, I sometimes wonder if you actually asked the Secretary of State that, they wouldn't be able to give you an answer. But
I know, it's really caught me off guard. I'm like, if I was Secretary of State, it's like I could do a million things and I can't do anything at the same time.
I very much think that's how they feel. Although perhaps viewing it this way, you travel a fair amount, obviously, with your work. What do you think, seeing how firms operate abroad and the cultures abroad. What do you think that the UK, as a business culture, especially in your sector, could learn from abroad to raise our standards, more generally speaking?
There's, at the moment, big parts of the tech sector are focusing on a few countries, mostly including Israel and India.
Mm.
Romania is starting to get into that list, but that's simply because of the data networks that are there, the labor. It's basically the tech sector with developers and other people. It's a very costly industry to be in. So I would say if we could change something in the UK, it would be around investment. How investors look at investment in the UK for the tech sector is very different how we look at it in America. VC firms over here look at mostly the equity side of things, which is a common thing that every VC firm looks at, but they don't look at how the growth is or support you in that all the time. That's, I think, a major difference that I faced with working in Qatari investment networks and America. That's kind of the largest thing.
That is very interesting, actually. I think that's something, if we're going to compete as a nation in this sector, we really do need to up our game a little bit, because you're quite right, the investment you see overseas in this particular arena can sometimes be a little bit dwarfing. And you mentioned it earlier, in fact. I mean, obviously, a lot of the talent you have here in London, many are from the subcontinent and mainland Europe. Do you find that perhaps we are sometimes lacking in the basic skill set the sector needs as a workforce in this country? And perhaps does that come down to not being taught the right skills at school early enough?
As soon as you were mentioning that question, I had that come up. So, fun fact about me, I dropped out of school at 16 after my GCSEs.
That's a Richard Weaver proud.
So, I've studied computing, I've studied media in school, and even business. Those are three things that are still at the top of our country, and there is so much potential our country has as to what we can do. But even in school, they're teaching us Python. Python is a great way to start in terms of language.
I should say, for some of the more technophobic listeners out there, would you mind just explaining Python? It's a form of coding, I think. That's
correct. Yeah, it's a form of language, so coding language. So in computing and computers, we have loads of different languages, and every language technically is supposed to have its own purpose. Some obviously provide other different types of advantages. There's many languages such as HTML, there's Java, PHP. It's a very big variety. We code iOS apps in Objective-C and Swift, so that's kind of, there's multiple languages. So in school they teach us Python over here in the UK, and recently, after seeing how it is in Canada and America, it's come to me, for me, it's a new knowledge for me to know that how they teach HTML and they teach PHP, they teach the basic languages, which allows somebody to easily grow and understand the tech industry and really get into it. That's something that India is doing at the moment as well. So, yeah, it would be really great to see if the UK could step up its game in terms of how we teach computing in school.
Without a doubt. And I think if we have any, and also more than I think just perhaps teaching it, it's actually making sure it's viewed with a decent amount of value as well. And it's not, just something that you can do, but something that you'd be, encouraged to do, as it were.
That's correct. Yeah, it's so many kids have so many ideas, but they end up kind of going for the general ones because that's how we've structured our system. It would be great to see if we could do the same for business. Sometimes even whilst I was in business classes, we got to see how we get taught business models, plans, but we're never really taught about taxation or financial literacy, which is something Warren Buffett speaks about a lot as well.
And regular listeners will be aware of this, but no matter who we sit down with and chat to, it does seem to be a common element these days, a common theme, I should say, these days, that there is a severe lack of personal and financial learning in schools, and there is a huge consequences to that when people grow up, and their employers find that out, and it can be very frustrating for all involved. And actually, you're absolutely, and it's the nail on the head there, and that's something that policymakers very much need to take a good hard look at as things stand. But perhaps more optimistically here, you're now the ripe old age of 19, I think I'm right in saying. What advice do you have to young entrepreneurs out there? What would be the golden rules you could hand them over to them?
I think the one golden rule that my age generation should focus on is reading some sort of book regularly. That is, I think, the best advice I can give. And sometimes people take that literally by reading a fiction book. I mean non-fiction, studying new things, understanding them.
Exceptionally important. Now, I'm conscious of the time here, and I'm sure we could probably chat for another hour or so, but we mustn't. I think perhaps I'll just finish by with one last question, especially when it does come to. I think if we talked about it so much, we should finish with it. When it comes to school children, especially those that are looking perhaps for a career specifically in developing software in this country, and all of the opportunities that affords them here and abroad, was there anything you could tell them specifically? If, age 12, 13, what would you say to the schoolboys and girls wanting to go into the sector?
Well, my younger brother is 14 himself, so and he has the inspiration of doing what I do in my industry. So my best advice would be, if you're looking into becoming a developer or a computer programmer, the best thing is to learn the basics of, I would say, HTML, starting with, and then looking into Objective-C or Swift, because we can face it, the best way to launch an app is to launch it on iOS before we launch it on Android. That's it's an unsaid, I would say, convention that we follow in the industry. So that would be my best advice for them, is to start programming as early as possible.
Well, Khurram, you're an inspiration to your brother, and I think many more. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Again.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Goodbye. I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Khurram, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at TechSimulator are continuing to raise standards. I don't know what it is you were doing at 19, but I can speak for myself, and it wasn't anything quite as impressive as that. We wish TechSimulator all the best, and I look forward to speaking with Khurram again soon. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in Tony Blair's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute of Blind People and the National Alzheimer's Society, and when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to David. Here it is now. We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen, and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that, because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation,
whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognize they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. Came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative Association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread in the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I write in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
It took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we're in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want. It's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my own constituency and say, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done.
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. And there has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, but even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party, is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently, that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear. Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick. They can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get, I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship. Well,
I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people take an interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through Parliamentary Review inwards. But we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works. Secondly, the complexity and difficulty of it. And thirdly, the way in which they need to tell us, I mean, I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service for most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. I mean, in that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no day where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it and that's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress, and we'll punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people, is there something you'd point to be optimistic, looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognise that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through, and we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union, and we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off the two chairmen to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by guests in each podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guests on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.